The white queen hovered between Cressida's fingers, a porcelain weapon poised above the board like a judgment waiting to descend. Across from her, Duke Ambrose Vesper leaned back in his chair with the lazy arrogance of a predator who had never once feared the trap. "Checkmate in 3 moves," he drawled, his voice carrying just loud enough for the lords gathered around their table to hear. Unless, of course, you'd care to concede now and save yourself the tedium. Cressida's jaw tightened. The silence in the gentlemen's club was heavy, thick with the acrid haze of cigar smoke and the crushing weight of masculine scrutiny. She was the only woman in this sanctuary of power, serene in her dove-gray gown with lace oversleeves, tolerated by the committee like a parlor trick, amusing to watch until she dared to win. "I do not concede," she said softly, placing her queen with lethal, silent precision. The Duke's blue-gray eyes, sharp and dissecting, flickered with something unreadable, amusement perhaps, or disdain. His long fingers drummed against the mahogany table, a restless rhythm that seemed to mock the pounding of her own heart. "Audacious," he murmured. "I admire that, though I wonder—" He slid his rook forward, a brutal, slashing attack. "If you truly grasp the precariousness of your position, madam." The alias felt like a fragile shield against the truth. Cressida Montford, the dutiful daughter expected to marry for status and shrink into domestic silence, did not exist within these walls. Here she was a mind unchained, free from the suffocating expectations of the ton, yet one slip would shatter her secret life and ruin her family name forever. "I know exactly where I stand, Your Grace." She moved her bishop, snapping the trap shut on a diagonal line. "The question is, do you?" A ripple of whispers tore through the watching crowd. The Duke's mouth curved, a smirk that promised trouble. He leaned forward, the charcoal gray of his suit blurring as he closed the distance, and she caught the faint, crisp scent of starch and expensive brandy. "Tell me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate register, "if you manage the impossible and win this match, what prize would you claim?" To be seen as an equal, she thought, but the words died in her throat. "No matter," he continued, his gaze locking onto hers. "Let's raise the stakes. Win this duel, and I'll marry you." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Laughter erupted from the onlookers, the cruel, barking sound of men who believed she was merely a diversion. Cressida's violet blue eyes flashed with hidden fire, her hand trembling with rage as she reached for the piece that would seal his fate. If you're already hooked on this fiery Regency duel of wits and hearts, smash that like button and subscribe right now. It really helps us keep bringing you these passionate, rule-breaking love stories. My cheeky nephew swears if we hit 1,000 subscribers, he'll finally stop teasing me and start sharing these tales with his friends. Drop a comment. Where in the world are you listening from today? Benin City? Lagos? London? Let's see those flags. But what happens when the Duke who mocked her suddenly becomes the only man who truly sees her, and someone wants her dead because of it? Stay with me. The sheer absurdity of the wager hung in the smoke-filled air. Marriage, as if her life were merely a trinket to be tossed onto the felt alongside pocket watches and coins. The surrounding lords guffawed, slapping their thighs at the Duke's wit, but Cressida felt a cold, crystalline focus sharpened within her. If he wanted to gamble his future on a game he thought he'd already won, she would oblige him. "Accepted," she breathed, the word barely a ripple against the noise. Ambrose's smirk didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly as she advanced her knight. It was a bold, aggressive sacrifice, inviting him to slaughter her defenses. He took the bait, his movements languid, dripping with aristocratic boredom. But 3 moves later, the trap snapped shut. Cressida unleashed a sequence of devastating precision, her bishop slicing through his pawn structure like a razor through silk. The laughter in the room died, strangled by sudden confusion. Ambrose sat up straighter, the burgundy of his waistcoat straining as his posture shifted from indolence to rigid attention. He reached for his queen, then hesitated. His hand, large, capable, and usually so sure, hovered over the ruins of his strategy. He saw the web she had spun. There was no escape. With a calm that defied the terrifying pounding of her heart, Cressida slid her white queen to the center of the board. The click of the piece against the wood echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Checkmate," she murmured. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The impossible had happened. The untouchable Duke of Gravenmore had been dismantled by a ghost in a gray dress. Ambrose stared at the board, his expression unreadable, before slowly lifting his gaze to hers. The mockery was gone, replaced by a dark, consuming intensity that made her skin prickle. He rose to his full, towering height, casting a long shadow over the table. The crowd braced for an explosion of temper, but instead his voice was a low, velvet rumble that vibrated through her bones. "I always honor my vows, madam, even the reckless ones." She had won the game, but as a shiver traced her spine, Cressida realized she might have just started a war she wasn't prepared to fight. And she wasn't the only one watching. From the shadowed corner of the gallery, a pair of malevolent eyes tracked her victory, deciding then and there that this unknown player had made her final move. The carriage rattled over the cobblestones, a jarring rhythm that matched the trembling in Cressida's hands. Safe within the velvet gloom of the cabin, she pulled the heavy pins from her hair, letting the severe, matronly bun unravel. With a sigh that was half sob, she wiped the powder from her face, shedding the mask of the dull, mysterious widow that allowed her entry into the world of men. Beneath the disguise, she was just Cressida again, 23, unmarried and terrified. It had started as a game 3 years ago in the dusty, sunlit library of her Aunt Lavinia. Lavinia, a progressive widow with a penchant for scandal and strong tobacco, had caught Cressida replaying famous matches from the newspaper. Instead of scolding her, she had poured 2 glasses of sherry. "Why let the men have all the fun, my dear?" she had whispered, conspiring against the rigid laws of the ton. Together they had crafted the persona, a fictitious cousin from the north, a mute mourning widow whose only solace was the chessboard. For years the disguise had been her armor. She lived for the thrill of the capture, the silent respect of opponents who would never look twice at a debutante. But the victory against Duke Vesper had changed the air in the room. It wasn't just a game anymore, it was a hunt. By the time Cressida slipped through the servants' entrance of her father's townhouse, the euphoria of checkmate had curdled into dread. Her father, a man who believed a woman's intellect should be confined to embroidery and menu planning, would disown her without a backward glance if he knew. The deception was a high-wire act, and the net was gone. 2 nights later, at the Duchess of Highbury's ball, the danger materialized in charcoal and burgundy. Ambrose Vesper moved through the crowded ballroom with the same predatory grace he displayed at the chessboard. Cressida froze near a potted palm, her heart hammering against her ribs. He shouldn't have recognized her, not without the heavy veil and the severe gray gown, but as he bowed to a lady nearby, his gaze swept the room, restless and searching. He was looking for the chess player. When his eyes landed on her, he paused. He didn't know, he couldn't know, yet he crossed the floor toward her with terrifying purpose. "Miss Montfort," he said, bowing low, "we have not been formally introduced, yet you seem familiar." Cressida forced a polite, vacant smile, hiding her trembling hands behind her fan. "I have a common face, Your Grace." "On the contrary," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her fingers, which were unconsciously tapping a rhythmic beat against her silk skirt, the same nervous tick she had displayed during their match. His eyes narrowed, a spark of recognition igniting. "I never forget a worthy opponent." Before she could deflect, a footman appeared with a silver tray of crystal goblets. "Wine, your grace, Miss Montfort?" Ambrose reached out, his gaze never leaving her face, peeling back her layers one by one. He handed her a glass, the red liquid shimmering under the chandeliers. "To unexpected discoveries," he toasted softly. Cressida reached for the stem, unaware that the glass she was about to raise held a danger far deadlier than the Duke's curiosity. The crystal rim was cold against Cressida's lip, the scent of the vintage masking a faint metallic tang. She hesitated, not because she suspected treachery, but because Ambrose's gaze felt like a physical caress, distracting and overwhelming. Before she could tilt her head back, a heavy hand clamped onto her shoulder. Lord Blackwood, a boorish rival from the chess club whose laughter had been the loudest during the wager, stumbled between them. His face was flushed with brandy and malice. "Vesper," Blackwood slurred, ignoring Cressida entirely as he snatched the goblet from her hand with shocking rudeness. "Hoarding the wine and the women? You've always been greedy." He winked clumsily at Cressida. "Let me save you from his dull company, my dear." Before Ambrose could intervene, Blackwood drained the glass in one greedy swallow. He slammed the empty vessel back onto the passing tray. "Sour," he grunted, wiping his mouth. "Damned sour." Then his eyes bulged. The silence that followed was absolute, terrified. Blackwood clawed at his throat, a guttural gurgle rising from his chest. He pitched forward, crashing into the refreshment table in a spray of shattered glass and silver. Foam tinged pink bubbled at his lips as he convulsed on the parquet floor. Screams erupted, the ballroom dissolved into a kaleidoscope of panicked silks and fleeing bodies. Cressida stood frozen, the ghost of the glass she had held seconds ago burning in her memory. Ambrose moved before the first scream had finished echoing. He didn't look at the dying man. He looked at her. His hand shot out, gripping her upper arm with a force that bordered on painful, anchoring her amidst the chaos. He dragged her backward, away from the crowd, into the shadows of a velvet-draped alcove. His face was pale, stripped of all arrogance. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice rough. He stared at the chaos, then back at her, his blue-gray eyes darkening with a horrific realization. Blackwood was a drunkard and a fool, but no one wanted him dead. He looked at her trembling hands, then at the spot where she had stood. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear, his body a solid wall between her and the room. "That was for you," he whispered, the words landing like stones. "The glass, I handed it to you. It was meant to silence you." Cressida's knees buckled, but his grip tightened, holding her upright. The terror of the chess match was nothing compared to this. Someone knew, and they weren't just trying to ban her, they were trying to erase her. "I will not let you out of my sight," Ambrose vowed, but promise sounding less like a comfort and more like a sentence. "Until I find who did this, you belong to me." She looked up at him, terrified to realize that the safest place in London was in the arms of the man who had wagered her freedom, and that his proximity was igniting a heat far more dangerous than the poison ever could have been. London's season whirled on, a dizzying parade of silks and scandal, but for Cressida, the world had narrowed to the span of Ambrose's broad shoulders. He became her shadow, a constant towering presence that was both her prison and her sanctuary. At the Smythe-Smith musical, he intercepted a glass of lemonade from a passing waiter, bringing the rim to his own lips first while holding her gaze. The room whispered, scandalized by the intimacy of the act, but Ambrose only swallowed, waited a beat to ensure the liquid was benign, and then handed it to her. The glass was still warm from his mouth. "Safe," he murmured, and the single word felt like a caress against her skin. Their days were spent in public formality, but the evenings, chaperoned only by a dozing aunt, were consumed by a different kind of fire. In the dimly lit library of her father's estate, under the guise of strategy lessons, they dissected the anatomy of their duel. He challenged her aggressive openings. She dismantled his reliance on traditional defense. It was intellectual warfare, and it was intoxicating. "You play like an anarchist," Ambrose accused one night, his voice low and rough as they debated a night sacrifice. He reached across the board to reset the pieces, and his hand brushed hers. The contact sent a jolt of pure voltage up her arm. Neither pulled away. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating with unsaid things. Ambrose's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, stripped of all mockery. "I have never met a mind that challenges mine," he confessed, his thumb tracing the sensitive skin of her wrist. "It is maddening and entirely necessary." Some viewers will click away now, too afraid to see how love can change everything. But if you're still here, hit subscribe so you never miss the moment she finally lets him in. Those who won't, tell me in the comments why you're choosing to walk away from this fire. I'll read every one. Cressida's breath hitched. The air between them crackled, charged with the terror of being truly seen. "Ambrose," she whispered, using his name for the first time without a title attached. He caught her hand in both of his grip desperate. "Marry me, Cressida, not for a wager, not for a game. Marry me because I cannot trust anyone else to keep you alive, and I cannot bear the thought of a day without this." He gestured between them, encompassing the board, the arguments, the heat. "Marry me, and I swear you will never have to hide your brilliance again." It was the offer she had dreamed of, delivered by the man who had once treated her hand in marriage as a punchline. She looked at him, wanting to believe, but the ghost of his laughter in the club still echoed in her ears. Could she trust the vow of a man who had once mocked the very idea of her? Or was this just another gambit in a game she was destined to lose? The petition arrived on heavy, cream-colored parchment, officially stamped by the Coalition for the Preservation of Intellectual Integrity. Its language was flowery, bureaucratic, and venomous. They sought a permanent ban on female hysteria in competitive play, citing Cressida's presence as a corruption of the sport's sanctity. But the whispers in the salons were far uglier. They called her a witch who charmed the pieces, a harlot who distracted men to steal their victories. Her father's reaction was swift and brutal. He threw the gossip sheets onto the breakfast table, his face purple with rage. "You are ruining this family," he spat. "End this madness, or I will send you to the convent in Cornwall before the week is out." Ambrose found her in the conservatory, staring blankly at the rain-lashed windows. He didn't ask. He knew. He placed his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him, his expression fierce with protective urgency. "Marry me today," he demanded, his voice rough. "With my title, they cannot touch you. A duchess is above their petty tribunals. I will build you a private hall. We will host our own tournaments. I will make the world accept you." Cressida pulled away, her heart fracturing. His offer was beautiful, but it was a gilded cage. She had seen the wives of dukes, ornamental, silent, their lives consumed by airs and social calls. Even Ambrose, with his progressive mind, spoke of building her a hall, of managing her acceptance. "I cannot," she whispered, backing away until the cold glass pressed against her spine. "Don't you see? If I marry you, I become your wife first and a player second. My victories will be credited to your tutelage. My losses will be proof of my gender's frailty. I will simply trade one prison for another." The hurt in his eyes was immediate and devastating, but she couldn't relent. The fear of being extinguished was stronger than her love. That night, alone in her room, Cressida made a choice that tasted like ash. The poison hadn't killed her, but the world would. There was only one way to stop the threats, to appease her father and to disappear from the crosshairs of the assassin. She had to lose. The championship match was tomorrow. She would sit across from Ambrose and she would make a mistake, a subtle, fatal error that would prove to the world she was nothing more than a lucky amateur. It would save her life, but as she extinguished the candle, Cressida knew the cost. Throwing the match would save her skin, but betraying the game and the man who respected her genius above all else might just break both their hearts beyond repair. The championship hall was a cauldron of noise and hostility, but for Cressida, the world had gone silent. The board before her was a map of her own destruction. She saw the winning line clearly, a queen sacrifice that would force Ambrose into a corner and secure her legend. It was beautiful, it was perfect, and she could not play it. To win was to paint a target on her back that no amount of ducal protection could shield. To win was to lose her family, her safety, and perhaps her life. With a trembling hand, she reached for her rook. She caught Ambrose's gaze, burning, intense, proud, and felt her heart shatter. She moved the piece to F5. A blunder, a subtle, fatal positioning error that left her king exposed. The crowd didn't see it immediately, but Ambrose did. His eyes widened, shock giving way to a dawn of horrifying realization. He looked from the board to her face, searching for the strategy, the trap. He found only resignation. He moved his bishop. "Checkmate," he said, the word leaden. The room exploded. Men cheered, thumping tables, vindicated that the natural order had been restored. The woman had faltered under pressure. Ambrose stood, but there was no triumph in his posture. He looked like a man who had been handed a crown made of tin. He seized her elbow, marching her off the dais and into the shadowed anteroom before the applause had even died down. "Why?" he demanded, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. "You had me in 4 moves. I saw it. You saw it." "I did what was necessary," she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. "You didn't just lose a game, Cressida. You insulted me," he hissed, stepping closer, his heat radiating through her layers of silk. "You decided I wasn't strong enough to protect you. You chose cowardice over us." "I chose survival," she cried out. Before he could answer, the door crashed open. A young man with Cressida's dark hair and a face twisted in fury stormed in, her brother, accompanied by 2 of the coalition members. "Cressida!" he roared, stripping away her alias in a single breath. The name echoed off the walls, reaching the ears of the lingering crowd outside. "You have disgraced our name for the last time." Ambrose stepped in front of her, a shield against the wrath, but the damage was done. The mask was shattered. "Get her carriage," her brother commanded. "She leaves London tonight." Cressida looked at Ambrose one last time. His face was a mask of devastation. She was being dragged back into the dark, away from the only light she had ever known. But as the carriage awaited, a note was pressed into her hand by a passing servant, a coordinate, a time, and a plea. Midnight, the library, one last chance to decide if she would vanish into obedience or burn the world down to be free. 6 months had scrubbed the fear from the air, replacing it with the crisp scent of revolution. The placard on the tournament table did not read Eliza Marsh. It read in bold, unapologetic script, Cressida Montfort. Across the board, Ambrose smiled, a genuine, dazzling expression that lacked all trace of his former mockery. They were in the center of the newly inaugurated Vesper Hall, the doors thrown open to the spring sunlight. "Your move, love," he murmured, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Cressida didn't hesitate. She reached for her queen. It was the exact sacrifice she had stifled in the shadows of her previous defeat. The brilliant, reckless maneuver she had denied herself to survive. She placed it with a sharp clack that echoed through the silent room. "Checkmate," she said, her voice ringing clear. Ambrose didn't scowl. He threw back his head and laughed, a sound of pure delight that startled the gathered crowd. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips in full view of the stunned committee. "Finally," he breathed against her skin, "you stopped holding back." Later, amidst the rustle of legal papers in his study, the true victory was codified. Ambrose watched as she signed the marriage contract, a document heavily revised by her own solicitors. It guaranteed her control over her inheritance, her right to travel without permission, and her absolute freedom to compete. "To be your wife," she said, setting down the quill, "I must remain myself. I will not be a duchess who fades into the wallpaper." "I wouldn't have you any other way," he vowed, pulling her into his lap and sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of ink and forever. "I fell in love with a queen, Cressida. I have no intention of turning her into a pawn." Together, they dismantled the barriers. The Vesper Montfort Cup became the first tournament to welcome women, and the sight of ladies in silk gowns decimating sputtering lords became the season's greatest thrill. Years later, the fireplate danced over a much smaller chessboard in the nursery. A toddler with Ambrose's golden hair and Cressida's fierce eyes reached for a pawn, his chubby fingers clumsy but determined. Cressida leaned into her husband's embrace, watching the next generation prepare to play, safe in a world she had helped build. If this ending warmed your heart, don't let the algorithm steal it from someone else. Subscribe now so more women's triumphs reach the world. If you won't, drop into the comments and honestly tell us why you're turning away from stories like this. I promise I'll read them all. Cressida looked up at the Duke who had once wagered her hand only to win her heart by losing to her mind. They had rewritten the rules, not just of the game, but of love itself. And they lived, not just happily, but brilliantly ever after.